Welcome to the Poetic Resurrection Podcast, where we explore perceptions. How self-reflecting questions can give you a better understanding of self. I'm your host, Sonia Iris Lozada. Stay tuned. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Poetic Resurrection. And today I am so honored to have Chuck Rosenthal. Welcome.
Hi, Sonia. Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me. And I'm having a good time promoting a really interesting, fun book.
Oh, I definitely want to hear about your book. And we could go into your book right now and then maybe a little bit of your history so people know how many books you have out.
Well, this is my 20th book.
Wow.
And my 15th novel. So I have a couple of books of I call magical essays, and because I believe in magic. And
so do I. I hate to say this. I don't know if people are going to like that, but so do I.
But as Henry James used to say, something doesn't have to exist to be real. And so, you know, it's fun. I sit around at night talking to my loved one, and we have magical thinking. We just let each other release and go with that kind of thinking. And I have a memoir as well, and then I have books of experimental poetry, which I've written with my life partner, and they're a lot of fun. One of them is sci-fi and one's noir, and all the lines are taken from movies. So that's fun.
Oh, can you explain to the audience what experimental poetry is?
Well, in this case, it certainly doesn't follow the normal conventions of rhyme and meter, but a lot of people write free verse. This tries to be disruptive. The sci-fi book, we kind of set scenes, and then we watched 75 1950s sci-fi movies, and we took lines. We would sit with each other, point and say, "Did you get that? Okay, write that down." And so we started writing them down. Then we typed them up and cut them into pieces and put them in a cow skull at first, but then we ran into too many pieces, so we had to get a ball. And we just took at random. We would take out lines and start to construct a poem, and either one of us could just say, "Oh no, not that," or this. And so that sounds pretty experimental to me. I don't know if I could find a definition for it, but it certainly is not a traditional way of constructing a poem. And we wrote a play based on that too. We put up a storyboard, had settings on Earth and a spaceship and Mars, and wrote a play for 9 characters. It got produced by the Culture Center downtown in Los Angeles, and packed house, standing ovation. But that's
wow.
Yeah, and because it was terrific. We had great actors for these parts. I don't want to go on because I'd rather talk about the book I just wrote.
Right. Awake from Ever in a Sweet Unrest. I would like to definitely know more about that book.
If you get Keats's collected poetry, that's what I did when I started to get excited about this book, and I read almost all the lyrical work, Keats and Shelley, and Byron, although I read some of the epical stuff for Byron because he's so hilarious and fun. The third from last line in the collected works is from Bright Star, which is what people call it. It's the opening line, and it is that line, "Awake forever in a sweet unrest," which that's Keats. You know, that's Keats, all right. And finding that blank space from which he can produce. So originally, when I ran into that, I just wrote down "Awake Forever." When I began writing the novel, it quickly came to me that the whole line was the novel. You know, there are ways when you get going, books write themselves, and that's a wonderful thing. And you spend time in your mind constructing scenes and dialogues and deciding where to go. And 90% of that never gets to the page. You just keep writing.
What is the storyline of Awake from?
It's a literary ghost story. So that's written by Henry James, wrote and Turn of the Screw, a rather famous one.
Yes.
And it's pretty good. Other people have done it. It borders on fantasy and certainly discovery, rite of passage, growing up for this main character, Beatriz. So there is a main character. So the ghosts are the things everyone wants to talk about. They want to talk about Keats and Orson Shelley and the ghost of Byron, and debatably the ghost of Coleridge. But Beatriz, the main character, holds this story together, this discovery, and she comes to a place here in Los Angeles, beyond Baroque, and the center of poetry, but in some ways alternative poetry. They have a lot of spoken word poetry too, not just strict poetry, not just that kind of stuff. And she takes on an internship. She's a high school dropout. Her parents have taught college. They're retired. She goes to Beyond Baroque and takes an internship, and they give her a job of going down into a newly discovered basement behind their building, recording what's in it, because there's tons of books in there. The only problem is when you go inside, because this is a ghost story, no electricity works. No machines, no cell phones, no TV, no flashlights even work. Even if you light a lantern, it dims when you go in there. They give her a lantern, a pad of paper, and a pencil, and she goes in the library and runs into a woman who claims to be Mary Shelley. Mary Shelley takes her on these adventures, two each, with Keats, Shelley, and Byron, and their adventures. These are not guys that are sitting around drinking tea and talking about vocabulary. Even though they're very well-educated men, they're wild guys too. They're experimented in drugs and alcohol, and they did wild things. Keats and Byron rode horses and hunted on horseback, sailed. That's how Shelley died, right?
Mm-hmm.
She goes for a walk. She ends up in Scotland. You just have to read the book and find out stuff happens. She ends up in Scotland, walking in the mountains with Keats. Things happen. They go to an ancient convent, which of course those were destroyed by Henry VIII, right?
Oh, yeah.
But what everyone thinks about it. And they encounter ghosts in the convent, and they also walk the Loch Ness, and you don't kind of end up there. So that's the kind of stuff that happens because I am a magical writer. Again, I'm a romantic writer. She walks across France with Shelley, Mary Godwin at the time, but she becomes Mary Shelley, right? Shelley's wife drowns herself in the Serpentine in London while he's walking around France with 16-year-olds. But well, times have sure changed, haven't they?
Oh, yes, they have. But let me tell you this, Matt. I as you're telling me the story, like, oh my God, I gotta read this book. It's everything I like. I like ghost stories. I like the spiritual of it. I like the knowledge behind the spirit of it. Right up my alley.
Well, the other thing, it's a page turner. You pick it up, you're going to read it, and it's not a long book. I wrote it longhand in notebooks. So, and I had a couple hundred pages in there, and I thought, oh, okay. When I was done, I was done, which I felt really good when I was. But of course, you're not really done when you're done. But I felt I'd written everything I wanted to. Now I had to change it around and do everything. And writing with pencil is a good thing because now I have to rewrite it. I must rewrite. I discovered a good habit. Although some books just roar out of you, and then you don't need to slow down. But you're going to want to know because Beatriz is developing and learning and coming into adventures, and her life is threatened, and she falls in love with these men, kind of course. So that possibility of romance hangs in the air, and there's dangerous situations. She goes sailing with Shelley and swimming with Byron in the Adriatic. So there are moments of very lovely romantic moments, and they're all very unique individuals. And so the way that she grows into their romance and the romances with them is she becomes more mature every time. And she does have to go back and report to her boss at Beyond Baroque wants to know where the notes. And she just comes up with these stories. And she has parents as well. That she lives in a shack behind their house in Venice, California. Has some explaining. She's not making any money, and
Yeah.
But they've given her a lot of security and a lot of freedom, and that permits this kind of thing to happen. But she still has to bounce back and forth between the reality she lives in and then the reality that she finds in that basement, which in some ways becomes more real than her reality at home. And in fact, right, Keats accuses her of haunting him. I'm not haunting you, you're haunting me. So so she learns to, really talk to these really interesting guys and do interesting things with them. And
I have a friend, as you're explaining this, I'm like, I have got to tell him about this book. He loves romance, but the fact that it has well, not sci-fi, but the spiritual element to it it's right up his alley. I had got to tell him about your book.
well, a couple people, Forward Magazine even classified this as a spiritual book, which I thought, well, if I did, I walked into that. I didn't really sit down and say, I'm going to write a spiritual book. It's pretty mystical. It's pretty spiritual. And it's about the soul.
Mm-hmm.
And each of these people discovering the soul. She encounters a homeless man on Venice Beach who might be Coleridge. So, and he takes her to Xanadu.
I love, because it seems my attention span is kind of short. I mean, that's why. So it seems like you got all these little short stories within the novel. So it really, for someone like me with short attention span, that's why I love short stories. I read them, I write them, my poetry, everything is short form for me. I can see each one being a short story, and it's like, oh, let me find out about Keats. Even though it is a novel, there is the sections of it that seem like shorter stories.
Well, and each of them open up, and they open up to her going back home and then back to early 19th century England. So they do function in that way a lot, but they're all open-ended. They're not episodes, right?
Right.
Of a sort, right? They're not linked in that way. I have a very short attention span too, I'm unfortunately, I'm a novelist, so I live everywhere I sit down. I have books, and I can just pick them up and read them, and I mean everywhere I sit down. So that's how I do it, and I have a good memory, so I can pick up all the different plots or stories or lines from maybe 5 or 6 books that I'm reading. And
Yeah.
the wonderful thing about being a writer and not a tennis player or a basketball player, of which I was both,
Uh-huh.
but it's you can keep doing it, and you can mature, and you can exercise that maturity and keep your mind active and live inside these stories and get better and better at what you're doing. And of course, I guess every writer believes that their last book was their best one, but this is a real good one.
Well, and I think you're right, because there's something about writing, there was always a thing about as you get older and you're not creative. I find that to be so not true. I am more creative now than I ever been in my whole entire life.
Well, I knew Wayne Thiebaud in Davis back when I was there in the late 70s, and but he was painting wonderfully into his 90s. Boy, there was a painter here in Los Angeles, or here in Topanga Canyon, is still painting in his 90s. That's one thing that does happen in your old age, is you lose a little thing. Okay, that was there a minute ago.
Wish I could blame that I'm getting older, but I've always been, for some reason, I'm one of these people. I could remember your face, everything, your whole life story, but I can't remember your name. It's like,
Well, having taught for many years, I taught my first college class in 1973.
mhm.
And and I taught at Loyola Marymount for maybe 35 years. That's a lot of students. And so I don't remember names very well. When I'm in a social situation, I'm going to say, what's that person's name again? I forget people's names, but you got to learn your students' names.
Yeah.
And that could be anywhere from 50 to 100 kids, I call them now, right? I didn't think I was a kid back then. If I have to walk through the classroom and point name and say, okay, I'm going to do this again. In the beginning, I want to get these names down. So that's how I beat that, because I had to.
Yeah.
I had to pay somebody's name. See, I remember your name, Sonia.
Yeah. I remember your name, Ruiz. He's right on the screen. Tell me about, what is your process when you're going to write a novel? Because I see you have poetry books as well. But in a novel, because I'm always fascinated about people that can write a novel, and the fact that you said that you have a short attention span, I could really learn from you and other people out there that do have a short attention span. How is your process?
Well, I just start. I knew I had to have a young character, and I couldn't have her too well educated. If this was a person who knew all about the Romantics and was traveling back to the Romantics, see, that would create a problem. She's got to discover, and that way is like the reader, because a lot of readers are discovering who the Romantics are as she discovers who the Romantics are. So that kind of worked out. Hemingway trick: never finish a chapter or a scene and stop. Always move to the next scene, next chapter. So when you come back the next day, there you are. And also thinking about, finishing that scene. Every book is different, and you write them in different ways. This was the shortest book I've ever written that's not a short story, and took the longest to write it, because I spent a lot of time thinking, okay, now what? And what these people say to each other, and rehearsing it and turning down, turning away. Not only do you have to be able to get rid of things after you've done them, but on your way, you're getting rid of things. No, I'm not going to go there. No, I'm going to go here. No, I'm not going to go there. And it takes faith in your creativity. I started 2 books since I finished this book.
Wow.
Didn't write either one of them. They weren't working. I walked away.
I've had that problem with poetry.
Well, okay, right. It's easier. Well, my life partner's a poet, and very different process. Very different process. Well, your poem, you can go back to it and work it. And I know poets that maybe 100 times revise a poem. Not a novel. You kind of have some faith that you made the right choices. So I kind of take it as it goes. I learn from myself, and in this book, I really kind of followed along, and I let Mary Shelley take. Okay, you're going to Keats. Okay, now we're going to go to Shelley, and people be on a boat, and then we're going to walk across France, because they did that. So okay, that way there was some. I'm not a biographer. I'm not a historian. I'm not a poet. Those were advantages for me, because I could just, okay, now they're walking across France. Well, you got to know some countryside, and you have to know some things about inns, and you have to know the culture at the time. What they're eating, what they can't eat.
What's available? Because that's another thing, is many types of food are not available.
Well, eggs.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's all the time, because you could just have a coop.
Eggs, cheese, bread, whiskey.
Oh yes, can't forget the booze.
Yeah. Well, I drink at night. Have some drinks.
Yeah.
I think it's fun at night, and we stay up late and talking and being affectionate, and I haven't watched television since 2013.
Wow.
So there.
I wish I could say that for me, but I'm an actor, so I have to watch television and know what's out there too.
Well, I know a lot of actors, of course, in this town, actors and poets.
Yes.
Many men, so in fact, I was supposed to have a beer with an actor tomorrow, but I can't, because I've got to go to a poetry reading.
Oh, what poetry reading is happening tomorrow?
She's being published in a collective that I'm a part of, and Stella. I'm sorry, Stella. And she's being interviewed by Gail Ronsky, who is my life partner. So that's kind of why I'm going to hear Stella read, because I'm going to follow. I've really learned a lot about poetry by reading John Keats, Percy Bysshe Shelley, and Lord Byron, and reading what Mary Shelley had to say in her essays that she wrote about Shelley's poetry after he died. And she had, in some ways, read his poems very differently than he did. And the last person you should ask about what they wrote is the writer, because they're just going to take it. So here I am. But what are you going to do? Somebody's got to do it.
One of my friends is an artist, and I don't know, and this is relating back to you. Have you had where people read into what you wrote and you're like, I wasn't even thinking about that, but okay.
Of course.
Yeah.
Because, right. Because as people have said, I think I started in the 70s or 80s, but it's even farther back in the 20s. People were saying, well, no reader, no book.
Oh, yeah.
And the meaning of the book is what the reader reads and what they think. And some people go so radically say that's all it means. Doesn't matter what the author might have intended or thought he or she did. That's important, but you kind of, even as a writer, I think you kind of discover your intentions even afterwards. And then when you read back into it, you can dangerously over-regard your meaning. And if you're doing that in process, then that could make you write poorly. You got to be pretty critical.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in school.
Mm-hmm.
I've been around people who could read my stuff and criticize it and put it back together. And I still trust myself more, but there's always a couple people who really get what you do. And that's what, if you're lucky, when you're a good teacher and you have a student who's writing, if you can find out what they're trying to do, boy, and that's what a good reader does that with anything.
Mm-hmm.
Find out what they're trying to do. I just read an essay by Virginia Woolf about that. And she said, well, how do you read a book? Well, you go enter, you give the author the benefit of the doubt and try to find out what they were trying to do. And yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And
that's a good place to start.
and sometimes what people read into it is okay. It's like, oh, I didn't think of that, but yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And sometimes I look at the critical reviews too, because I want to see if there's a streamline within those critical reviews to see if it's something that I find true, or it's, maybe it was written in a way that might give people the idea that that's what it was. So you learn from the critical reviews as well, I find.
I had to be a critic to get through school, but I didn't want to be a critic. I went for a PhD in philosophy,
Mm-hmm.
and I decided, well, when I got close to the dissertation, that's not what I wanted to do with my life. Just talk about other philosophers.
Mm-hmm.
So I left and for a while, kind of went home and started to write novels. Wrote 3.
Wow.
And just kept writing. And I couldn't find anybody to read them. But kept writing and learning and reading other people and permitting yourself to be influenced. Some people feel that they can't be creative if they're under the influence of some other writer. And I think, oh, geez, no. At the time when I finally broke out and found my voice for my first novel, Loop's Progress, I was kind of crazy about Kerouac, but I couldn't write like Kerouac. But Gabriel Garcia Marquez,
I love him.
lit me up. And I said, oh, right? Magical things can happen. You don't have to just try to copy, make reality something out your window. You can create it, and you can do whatever you want. And if it's no good, you can throw it out. That's the other thing, right?
Yeah.
That you sit down every day and when you're trying to do something important, but also this is practice. I'm practicing now. I'm not performing. I'm not on the stage right now. I'm practicing. Takes the pressure off you. You can just write, and sometimes you write something good, and that's another good reason to write a lot, because there's lots of bad work out there by great writers too. So
Well, one of the things they say is that you don't know what you can do until you fail. And once you fail, you go, oh, now I can go in a different direction.
I had a horse trainer that said that pray for mistake. Pray for mistake, because I'll fix it.
Yeah, because you don't know. You don't know if you're going in the right way until you make a mistake and it says you're going down one path and it's like, oh, I need to go back this way. And I think that's how we learn as writers too, how not to write. Because I've read some of my old stuff and I'm like, oh, this is not very good.
Well, that's a tough thing to do. Go back and read your old stuff. Read your journals. I just know I kept a journal for some time, and boy, did I lie to myself all the time. But it's too, and yeah, this is what I did. I'm going to tell her this. Yeah, you're not going to tell her anything.
Yeah, but you learn from that. You're like, oh my God. And you know what you were going through in that part of your life.
Yeah.
It's like a good history journal. It's like, oh my God, look at the changes I was going through when I wrote this. I think journals are amazing. I mean, I looked at some of my journals and said, well, this thing has been happening over and over and over again. I need to change.
Yeah, I don't keep one now. I just started another kind of a diary, but I don't know what I'm going to do about it. I'm writing so much, and so much of your work does pour onto the page. I think particularly you're a novelist. a book I just started, I was trying to deal with my childhood before I was 12, because when I was 13, a very traumatic thing happened, and let's not digress there. But it was just old stuff. I'd been there before. I'd written about it before in fiction. I'd done it, and so after 50 pages, I stopped. I said, "Okay, I don't want to do this."
No.
So, and I'm going to back up and start rewriting. Don't do that. Finish your book, then rewrite.
I totally agree, because if I rewrite, there's one story that I didn't have the whole thing, and I started rewriting, and I totally lost the story. I threw it all away and started from scratch.
Yeah. Well,
because you do influence yourself. So we are getting towards the end of our interview, and I know it's gone pretty quickly.
and it's meandered, but okay.
Is there anything you would like to address with the audience that you might want them to know?
Well, this is a really fascinating book. And I think if you open yourself up to it, you're going to really be caught, and you're going to laugh and cry and learn. I'm very pleased with what I've done, and I want other people to appreciate it and like it and be moved. Yes.
Well, you got me sold on it, because it's got all the premises of things I like, because you get to learn history about the writers, and that might get people more interested in looking at those writers as well. It's like, oh, this is interesting.
Yes, and some people have asked me if I wrote it in order to reinstigate, youth in the Romantics, and I didn't write the book pedagogically. In other words, I didn't write the book to teach anybody anything. But I think now that it's written, you can learn some things you can get interested in. You might get interested in reading these characters, because they were very wild, and they're all very interesting, including Mary Shelley herself, who wrote Frankenstein when she was 19.
Oh, she was 19?
Yes.
Wow, that was young.
Yep, sure was. There's a story there. You have another 30 seconds? She's hanging out in a castle with Byron, Shelley, and a guy named Polidori, and they're reading ghost stories from the German translated into French, and they all decide they're going to write a novel, a scary novel. And of course, Shelley and Byron get on their horses and ride away, but she stayed there and wrote Frankenstein, and Polidori wrote the first vampire novel called Yes, but it's not that good.
Bram Stoker's much better.
Yes, but Frankenstein is a hell of a novel, and it's wow.
It was always one of my favorites.
Yeah,
Frankenstein.
It's so to accomplish it at 19 is,
but also 19 was like a super adult at that time.
Well,
girls were getting married at 13.
Yes, and the education is very different. So, like all these guys reading classic Greek and Latin and speaking French and Italian, and they're 20, right?
Yeah, it's impressive. So, any last words before we this?
ChuckRosenthal.com is my website. And you can see all my work on there and all the other things I've accomplished or succeeded or failed at.
And I will put all these links to your website, to your book, and all of that on the note department.
I would say I should show my book.
Yes, show your book. That is a beautiful book, by the way.
Gorgeous cover.
Yes.
These people did right by me, and my publisher, Teresa de Room of Walton Well, and the designer, Ash Goodwin, who was from Portland, and they put this together. And
I will also do a little clip on that so that they can see your book.
Okay. Well,
Chuck, thank you so much for doing the podcast.
Thank you, Sonia.
And I wish you much success on this book and the future. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. So long.
Thank you for listening to the Poetic Resurrection podcast, available on Apple iTunes, Spotify, Amazon Music, and many other podcast platforms. Please visit us and subscribe to our newsletter at poeticresurrection.com for the latest information and updates.